let's talk about the books I read in March and April. So I did some rereading, which I'm not going to talk about, but then I finished 2 series and read a few other books. So I'm going to start with the series that I technically finished in May, but I just want to get it done with and finish talking about it. And that is the Shattered Sand series by Bradley P. Beaulieu. So I finished book 5, the last novella in book 6, in March and April. I will just say that it's a desert fantasy, and while I found the middle of the series dragging a bit, and I don't know if I'd really recommend this series, and I'll do a review on it, because it's quite a complex world. I'm glad to be done with it. I started it 2 years ago. I'm finally finished with it and can make space for a different series. And it was a good ending for what it was, but just not really my kind of book. So the books I read in that world, I guess, were When the Jackals Storm the Walls, which is book 5, A Wasteland of My God's Own Making, which is technically like a prequel novella, but I read it in this order that I think his website said to read it in, the authors, and then the last book, A Desert Torn Asunder. So very glad to be done with that. I had kind of a sunken cost fallacy thing going on, but let's go into the next series, which is one I actually really enjoyed, and I read books 2 and 3 of the Live Ship Trader series by Robin Hobb. This is the second trilogy in the realm of the Elderling. So I'm not going to go too much into plot, but I will just say that, in comparing it to the Farseer trilogy, which is very focused on one character, it's from first-person perspective, you're really only getting like the breadcrumbs of the plot that your first-person narrator is able to provide to you. So it feels a bit more quiet, a bit slower, but when things happen, a bit more out of the blue, because you're anticipating things with your character, so you don't really know like the whole scope of things that's going on. Like, Robin Hobb is able to seamlessly do the opposite. She's able to take a large cast of characters in a third-person perspective, but what I would consider like a close third person, where you can very clearly tell that you're following a certain character in chapters because you can see a little bit into their thoughts and perspective. She was able to do that really well. She was able to weave very distinct characters. You're really following one family, the Vestrits, and then you're following a few other characters that are adjacently connected to the family, and you're seeing like their storylines come together. You're seeing political machinations come together. You are seeing really, really nice character development, especially with your younger characters. I don't know how Robin Hobb had me going from like really hating one of the characters to finding them extremely fascinating by the end. She's also really able to toe that line of like, when a character goes too far. Like, there is one character in the series that is always doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, and my transformation and feelings about that character as things went on and they did a very specific heinous act, it was like it took me a second to realize like how far I was willing to allow myself to like a character even when they were really a bad person. So overall, just great series. I loved that like you had a decent number of characters in a lot of distinct places, but the plot and like everyone kind of like came together, so by the end it was a bit more fast-paced. Really great series. I loved it. I just really loved it. And I would say that I guess, not to move on yet, the Live Ship Trader series is very much like all one piece. Like, there's the trilogy, but everything's kind of back to back to back. You're not getting like huge time jumps. It doesn't really feel like you're not getting like complete resolution at the end of each book. Like you have the intrigue to jump into the next. So really love that series. And then from there, I will move on to Fool's Errand, which is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy. In this story, again, you're following Fitz. I can't really say much because you follow Fitz in the first trilogy, so I don't really want to say too much of what happens, but it's Fool's Errand, so you can guess another character that comes into play. This one where Farseer trilogy could take like large swaths of time and portray them in such a way that it was like interesting to follow. This was a much shorter span of time that you were witnessing. I loved seeing Fitz aged in a capacity, mentally, physically, having responsibilities that are different than the ones that he had, and really facing the same challenges in some capacities, facing them from a different perspective. I loved seeing the wit and the skill again in this. And it was it was just like at times a very heartbreaking book. There's a specific chapter that really destroyed me. I'm reading these with Mariana at Mariana Moss Books, and I just highly recommend The Realm of the Elderling as a series, even though I'm not finished with it. And I think that there's something really like pleasant about reading it with another person, because it's just one of those books in one of those series that's really ripe for rereading. Like you can tell that there's so many breadcrumbs you're not picking up, and Mariana and I kind of pick up on different ones. The connections back to the Live Ship Trader series were really interesting. And just to go back to the Live Ship again, the connections to the Farseer were interesting, and I loved seeing like the world get like broadened. But it was in this series, in Fool's Errand, it was nice to be back in the Six Duchies. Oh yeah, and then I also read, I forgot, in between those two, I read The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince. This is a novella that is about the wit and how the wit came to like the wit magic, which is like the magic that connects certain people to animals and really the world at large around them, which is a very frowned upon, and it's kind of people have it in secret. And this novella talks about it provides the story of the reason why it's a hated magic. So I read that before I went into Tawny Man. There's a lot of talk about the Piebalds in the Tawny Man, the first one, Fool's Errand. So Mariana didn't read that one in the order I did, because chronologically, publication order, it came out later. But I had seen a lot of people recommend you read this novella before going into Tawny Man. I thought it kind of enhanced my viewpoint, because you're able to see like what actually happened in the novella versus like the lore that exists now, which is a lot of based on lies. So yeah, I really liked that connection. It was very short. Okay, now moving on to things outside of that. Okay, the next thing I picked up, or I guess one of the books I picked up, was Lost in the Moment and Found by Seanan McGuire. This is the most recent addition to the Wayward Children series. This book is much darker than some of the other ones in terms of content. Grooming, assault, or like the fear of an assault, which is what drives your main character to her door in her universe. So I guess generally this is a portal fantasy series where children find doors and they go through doors, and there's push and pull factors that bring the right door to them. And in this one, she is in this lost and found, almost like a thrift shop, where the things that are lost come to. And because of that, it has access to a lot of different portals and doors that she can go into between universes. So this one was quite dark in comparison, like at least at the beginning, and then it still kind of had more dark themes than some of the other books in the series, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a novella, it's very short. I thought it was a strong entry into the series. I also read a nonfiction from my list of ones that I wanted to read in 2023. I read Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. While it's like kind of portrayed as a book about the opioid crisis, it's not really about the people impacted by the opioid crisis as much as it is about why the opioid crisis exists in the way it does. So the book is kind of broken up into a few parts. In part one, you're really following the Sacklers, who are the dynasty family from the US that developed OxyContin. And so you get to see like kind of like generations of the family develop and gain wealth and get into the pharmaceutical industry, get into the advertising industry, combine those two industries together. And you don't even see OxyContin production begin in the first part of the series. It's really about the creation of the dynasty, the creation of the legacy, the creation of the family name, and how the Sackler family name was so divided from the drug industry and how they were really able to accomplish that. So the first part, very much about the family, very much about the setup. Very interesting in the ways that they were able to change the advertising industry for drugs, where drugs used to be really just advertised to doctors. They changed the way they were advertised to doctors, and then they started advertising it much more to the consumer, which we see the effects of now. You can't turn on the TV, at least in the United States, without seeing a drug advertisement commercial. It's actually quite crazy how many you see. And then we get into the next part, which is really about the not really like the scientific development of OxyContin, but like getting OxyContin onto the market. It was very interesting how they did it. They kind of, it's just always really interesting how like people just like how government regulatory agencies get bypassed. I saw this in Bad Blood. You see this in Empire of Pain, or when there's like in this one, the FDA really shouldn't have approved things that they approved. They approved regulatory artwork, which the patient insert in the package, that all of the language within that needs to be approved by the FDA. They approved statements that weren't necessarily true. Like, it's just crazy the types of things that happen. There's a quote from this book that I just find really kind of sums up what you gain from this book. So the opioid crisis is, among other things, a parable about the awesome capability of private industry to subvert public institutions. I just think that statement is a very powerful representation of what you see in this book. Like, yes, the FDA is involved, but also like the Justice Department and different, agencies trying to go after this company. And then in part 3, you kind of learn about different agencies were really trying to gain evidence to sue the company and sue the Sacklers specifically. And yeah, so it's just really interesting look at how a dynasty that can be known in so many public institutions for giving to the arts can get their money in ways where they perform massive harm on people. It also is really interesting look at how drug advertising came to be in the way that we know it now, and how really the opioid crisis and the opioid epidemic was pushed by specific advertisers of specific drug companies, and how they lied in order to get people to take their drugs that are highly addictive. And then about the way that private institutions are able to protect themselves from justice. So those were all of the books I finished in March and April that were not rereads. I am attempting to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I've put it down. I'm like 240 pages into an over 800, looks like an 850 page book. For those who have read it, like, tell me, is it worth it? Because, like, I can't help but continuously compare this to Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is also a historical fiction about, like, magic in this time, and just find that one to be a lot more interesting. So let me know if it's worth continuing on, because it is a slog at this point, and I have just put it down for the time being. But anyway, that is all I got. Let me know if you enjoyed any of these books, and until next time, happy reading.